And we want to welcome and thank you for joining us for the official kickoff of the ACI HR series, Topics and How to Initiate Change. For those of you who we haven't met, I'm Erica Schwegman, the Associate Director of Membership and Operations for ACI.
And I'm Jen Galt, the Education Program Manager here at ACI. And before we get started, we just want to remind everyone to please remain muted throughout the program, and we encourage you to keep your camera on. And feel free to use the chat feature at the bottom to thank our speakers, ask questions that you have as we go through the presentation, and to meet other participants today. If you haven't already done so, please select the speaker view in your upper right-hand corner of your screen. And as a reminder, the program will be recorded.
All right, now that we've gotten through the housekeeping, we wanted to share a quick reminder of why we are here today. ACI has offered many HR programs in the past, and with the ever-changing economy and regulations, we found that our members are thirsty for information on best practices, updated regulations, effective retention programs, and much more. So we decided it was time to offer an official series of where you could depend on information from subject matter experts each month, and we created the ACI HR series, Hot Topics and How to Initiate Change.
And we're honored that you've chosen ACI as your HR resource today, and look forward to working with you each month, since we have a great webinar every month on different topics. But now it's my pleasure to introduce you to your presenters for today's very first HR series program. So we have Barbara Thompson with Beckett Springs and Diane Pipes with TriHealth EAP, and they will be presenting on alcohol, still the most used drug and causing the most accidents. So welcome, Barbara and Diane, and we'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. First, I apologize, just as we started, they were doing construction on my street and the window was open. So I thought, okay, let me go fix that first. And the mailman already came, so my dogs should be quiet throughout this program. I don't know if the mailman has been to Diane's house yet or not, but thank you so much for having us. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And like Jen and Erica said, any questions that come up, you can stick them in the chat. And of course, we'll have room for questions at the end. Ari, I expect lots of questions from you. I can't believe you're not on camera, so special shout out to you. Let me find my PowerPoint and share.
Hey, Barbara, while you're sharing, I'm just going to introduce myself a little. So I'm Diane Pipes, and I right now am a manager in the corporate health department of TriHealth, and one of the departments I supervise is the employee assistance program. And I've been there for 3.5 years. When I introduced myself the last time for a training, I think I said 2.5, like I lost that year with COVID. So, and my whole career, I've been in behavioral health services, just different types of fields, but whole career, and have a bachelor's in psychology, bachelor's in social work, and a master's in social work, and I'm independently licensed here in Ohio.
Good. And as you can see, I'm able to share the screen. Here is the TriHealth EAP information. So do you want to go on with the services?
Sure. So just a little bit about EAP. We are a local EAP with a national footprint, though. So we service a lot of companies here, local, but they have employees all over the country. So we therefore have affiliates all over the country, actually in all 50 states and Puerto Rico. So we provide the free counseling services. We provide assessment and treatment for substance abuse and alcohol. We do fit for duties, management referrals. We do crisis intervention. We have a 24/7 answering 24/7 crisis line, that folks can talk to one of our counselors. We don't farm that out. And I'm always on backup for that. So if you're in a crisis on Saturday evening or Sunday morning, that's what it's there for. We do offer work-life services too. So we're full spectrum. And we do trainings like this, and we also provide critical incident response, which is where we go on site, and when a when there's been some sort of traumatic event for a workplace. And we provide an on-site counselor to be available for walk-in appointments and or group work. So sometimes companies like the group, sometimes they're like, my folks weren't going to talk. So we just say, and we're available for walk-ins. And I think that's a good wrap up for us.
So, see. Hold on. Technical difficulties over here. I've only been doing Zoom for a year now.
Is it sticking on you?
It is. It is. So Beckett Springs, for those of you that may not be aware of us, we are a behavioral health hospital. We work a lot with EAPs, including TriHealth EAP, whereas they do not provide actual treatment. That's what we do. So we have inpatient and outpatient. We provide services for people with mental health crisis as well as addiction. And then for our outpatient, as well as inpatient on Help for Heroes, we have a couple specialized programs. Help for Heroes, which is first responders and frontline workers, such as ED staff, dispatch, fire, police, those folks, as well as veterans. WISE, which is for older adults. And then we have an outpatient for children and adolescents. And then we work a lot in our community providing mental health and addiction education programs like this. Our assessments are available 24 hours a day and they're free of cost. And they, I'm gonna have to turn that down a little bit, free of cost. And so like Diane, we are available 24 hours and it's us answering the phone, and everyone who's answering the phone is a trained clinician. So while we're not a hotline or a crisis line, everyone is trained to work in crisis. And we may end up sending out mobile crisis or something else. So if you ever need this kind of services, you can always reach out to me and happy to help in any way we can. So now we will start our program eventually. Well, maybe we just have to do this tiny. There we go. No, that's backwards. Sorry, everybody. Next. Okay, so COVID-19 impact. Oh, this is me. So even though we're all pretty used to living in the COVID-19 world at this point, we still want to kind of go over what has been happening with us. You know, a lot of isolation, uncertainty, financial crisis. And what we saw, those things all can lead to an increased use of substance, specifically alcohol. It's readily available and it's legal. But then we also have seen a rise in mental health issues. According to CDC, this time actually in the last 3 months, compared to the last 3 months last year, all inpatient admissions, both on the mental health side and the addiction side, are up by 30% across the country, which isn't a significant increase. And, you know, we can attribute that to a couple of things. One, people do talk about it more than they did several years ago, but really we're seeing a lot of that isolation, that lack of touch that we all needed. So the last 6 months, the work stress has been increased. Now it's changing a bit because we're coming back to work, but that's creating a whole other set of problems as far as who's working at home, who's in the office. When I go to the office, am I sharing an office? All these things that are happening. A lot of times our workspaces are different. So we're continuing to have maybe different types of stress. But according to a recent survey, this, you know, you can see right there, I'm not going to read the screen, but a couple that I like to point out are, 10% say they work in an environment where physical violence has occurred because of workplace stress. And, we've seen that on TV. But I thought even more interesting was 14% of us felt like striking a coworker, but didn't. And I think when we say 14% felt like striking, not the typical like, oh, I could just hit that person, but really felt and had to hold themselves back from hitting someone. So, we're kind of lashing out in a way that we usually didn't. But the most common are end of the day neck pains, sleep disturbances, things like that. I'm sure no one in this call has had any of these issues ever. But so, yes, I especially enjoyed the have been driven to tears. That's me. No, it happens. But so we're looking at all these things. And so when we look at the typical stress cycle, and this happens no matter what your stress is, a loss of a job or, failing in school, whatever your stress is. So you have a stress and then you have a reaction to it. That may be overeating, drinking too much, sleeping too much, not sleeping at all kinds of things that we do under stress, which creates that wear and tear on our body. We don't operate as well when we're not eating right, sleeping right, using substances. So are reduced of optimum health. And then we become even more sensitive to other stresses. So I'm going through a divorce, and I'm not really, but if I were going through a divorce, this is a big stress. And so my body's going to be going through this. And then I'm increased to additional things. So then my coworker tells me that they're going to be late on a project. I may just explode on them because I've got all this other stuff. And all of us were under this COVID stress, which we kind of look at the COVID-19 stress cycle, how that worked with us. So, your stressor is the pandemic. When you aren't going on vacation, people are teaching their kids, somebody's out of work, or both people are working at home and you don't have home offices because you never did before. So we just start to get, and it was a more slow breakdown. It wasn't an initial thing like, a death in the family, a divorce, a loss of a job. It was all these pieces kept eating at us. So I know I got my COVID extra weight from unhealthy eating. And maybe more wine than usual, but we're not sleeping as well. We're not eating as well. We're not working out the same way we did. Our whole schedules have gotten off, which lowers our immune system intolerance. And then we're more easily affected by those little things that we used to just let roll off our shoulders. Now it's just, I'm done with it all. And I think most of us can relate to lashing out at some point when it didn't really make sense. And that was with the COVID-19. It's that stress you didn't feel and weren't really aware of because it was constant and it wasn't overt. If like me, if you weren't obviously affected, because I didn't lose a job, my job stayed pretty much the same. My life didn't change a whole lot except that I couldn't go out. I couldn't make plans. I couldn't, plan. So that stuff really starts to weigh on folks.
Hey, Barbara, I'm going to jump in for a second. One of the things too, if you want to run back to that other slide, if you get it, there you go, is, when we stay in a constant state of stress, everybody's probably heard of cortisol, and, that's when we're in a stressful situation and cortisol starts pumping through our bodies to get us ready to fight or flight. And, we don't have that release. It just stays with us. That cortisol hangs out in our bodies and just really becomes toxic. And it just wears your body out. Like Barbara was saying, it reduces your immune system's ability to fight off stuff. It just wears your body out. And that's what we've seen for people for over a year now, is that they've just stayed in a constant state of stress. And they haven't had those, as Barbara mentioned, those normal, typical for us, effective coping skills. Those things were taken away. Our gyms were closed, and our time with our family was shut down. All those things that we would normally go to relieve stress went away too. So we were left kind of in a state of not having any coping skills. And as a result, we saw lots of people turning to alcohol. As Barbara mentioned too, easily accessible, legal, usually in your home. So we've seen just a lot of people turn to that as a coping mechanism, and we've seen a lot of things on social media too, kind of making light of it. I don't know if anyone saw like the what was it on Facebook? I think it was Beers with Bashir for the governor over in Kentucky. And what was it in Ohio, Barbara?
Wines with the
wine. And stuff like that, and kind of making light of it. And I laughed too, but then we saw some of the, ripple effects of this, and it's been very difficult for folks. So
I think you bring up a good point, since our next question is about alcohol, in that we were staying at home. So we've also heard, both of us, from people we work with, and then anecdotally, people drinking more than they usually would have, because if they were going out, they may have a glass, maybe two at dinner over a long period of time. Well, they're at home, they're not going anywhere. And so a glass turned into a bottle, no judgment. But, we saw a lot of people who found themselves doing behaviors more than they did before, just because they were at home. There was, nothing to worry about. Which brings us to our next question. And we aren't talking about drinking on the job, but in general, what percentage of on-the-job accidents are alcohol and drugs responsible for? And you can put your answers in the chat. I pulled my chat back up. Okay. We have an A, a D.
No consequences for wrong answers, just
No.
participation is encouraged.
Yes. Okay. Did anyone get it right, Diane? Were you looking in the chat?
It's actually B, 65%.
It is. So, and this is the percentage of on-the-job accidents. And we all work in some kind of field where there's safety related. And so we often know it's not adhering to a safety protocol that creates the accident, but often those decisions are caused by alcohol or drugs. And
the good side of this question, though, is that we can do a lot of things to affect that percentage, and education, doing what we're doing today, is part of that.
Yeah. I guess when I have this chat up. So apparently when I pull the chat up, that's when my computer gets all, I don't like you.
So employment and alcohol and substance abuse. I love that first setup there, because most people tend to believe that folks who have alcohol use disorders are not employed. And the reality is that the vast majority are, 90% of people. In fact, we see, and on the mental health side, we see the job as one of the last things that people lose. They have lost friends, they've lost family members, relationships are all a mess, but they manage to keep their job until things get really, really, really bad for a lot of folks. So, and whether they're other substances or alcohol, as you can see with that second bullet point, another staggering statistic there. Either way, they need that job for some stability, and also they need the money to continue to be able to use, quite honestly. So we tend to see the job as one of the last things to go. We've got about 15% of folks who say they've used alcohol before or during work. And I think if we poll people again shortly, I think that number will go up with all the at-home things going on. And alcohol is responsible for about 88,000 people dying annually due to related causes. So that's all kinds of alcohol issues taken into on that statistic.
And I always like to add, when we bring that up, and of course now I haven't presented on opiates in so long, but other substances often get the spotlight, and the opiate epidemic is horrible. I'm not lessening that, but we're looking at about 50,000 folks annually versus 88,000. And this 88,000 has stayed pretty much the same. The opiate number has gone up, but the 88,000 has stayed pretty much the same for the last 10, 15 years. And like Diane said, this is cirrhosis, strokes caused by alcohol, because they can relate it to that. So it's all kinds of different diseases that alcohol can cause.
So there's a couple of ways that people get into trouble with alcohol at work. And one of them is the late stages of alcoholism. So that's when someone's drinking quite a bit and they've got alcohol in their system just all the time. It just doesn't have a chance to get out because they're drinking that much. The body just doesn't have time to metabolize it out. So that's one way that you might see someone get into trouble. The other is that 15% who drink while working. So that's the stereotypical, somebody who's got alcohol in their car or their locker at work or in their desk. But that's also a smaller percentage than the third bullet point there, which is the leftover alcohol. So when we drink, everybody knows it's easy for the alcohol to go in. It's hard for it to metabolize and get out of our bodies. So if, we drink one glass of wine or one drink with one shot of Beckett, and it takes, generally speaking, and there are differences, but generally speaking, about 90 minutes for that to get metabolized and out. And what happens is people go out, during the week, per se, it's a Wednesday, they go to happy hour, then they continue to drink after happy hour ends. And next thing you know, it's 1 o'clock in the morning and they've been drinking the whole time, and they have to get up and be at work at 6 in the morning. They have 5 hours for that alcohol to get out of them. And it's just not enough time. So person, may even shower, get cleaned up, go into work, and they still kind of smell like alcohol. It's kind of coming out of their pores. So, a supervisor walks by and smells it on them. And they haven't drank before work or during work, but, their blood alcohol levels still so high from the night before that it's going to show on a breathalyzer. So we see a lot of that happening, that come through EAP for assistance. But that really is the most common way that people get into trouble. Just want to also mention the hangover effect. Even if people don't have, alcohol still in their body, if they have been out the night before and they've got a hangover and they've got maybe a headache, sensitive to light, maybe upset stomach, they're just not 100%. And that's when accidents can happen as well. So we look at all of those. The hangover effect too can be a way that someone gets into trouble. And again, the person just doesn't look like themselves and they're not performing up to speed. So a supervisor will intervene. And we'll talk about the supervisor intervention here shortly. So the alcohol effects and how it relates to safety and workplace accidents. So alcohol is a bimodal drug. It's a stimulant, then a depressant. So if you think about when you have a drink, maybe a glass of wine after work, and you drink that glass of wine and it kind of gets you a little more talkative, a little happy, that little euphoria kicks in and you're feeling pretty good. You can continue to drink, then that depressant stuff kicks in and it starts taking the person down. It's also going to affect coordination. Any of the drugs that we talk about, any of our substances or alcohol, they all impair the central nervous system, which is what controls our coordination. So if my brain says, I want to drink of water, it's telling my central nervous system to basically pick up my glass. If I've had some cocktails, that's going to be harder to do because it affects our coordination. So it also affects our reaction times. We're slower to respond to things. So if you think about driving and you see a car sitting at a stop sign and your brain's thinking, I need to hit the brakes, I need to hit the brakes. So you slow down in time. Our reaction times are just not what we think they're going to be. And they can be slower. We see that car, we try to react and hit the brakes, but we don't in time and end up rear-ending that car. It also affects our judgment. So this is where we see people in the workplace sometimes skimp on safety rules. So that's the person who's had, that leftover alcohol in their system and they're still a little impaired from the night before and they're not feeling so great because the hangover effect's creeping in on them. And that's when judgment gets impaired and we say, oh, I don't need to put those safety glasses on. I don't need to put the gear on. We just don't follow the best rules. We skimp on things and take shortcuts. And alcohol affects our ability to problem solve. No one has ever made good decisions after drinking an entire bottle of wine. So our ability to focus, all those things are impaired. You might get a little bit of like fleeting thoughts and fleeting from one task to another with that ability to focus. So again, if you've got something detail oriented that a person's trying to do, that has to maybe think through some problems or some tasks, the alcohol is really going to affect them with those kinds of jobs.
I don't know. I make great decisions after a bottle of wine.
So alcohol, some of the symptoms, that you'll see obviously odor. With any of our substances, when we talk about reasonable suspicion that's coming up here shortly, there's only two substances that we can smell: alcohol and marijuana. If I were to get up from an in-person meeting with Barbara and go to the bathroom and do a line of cocaine and come out, Barbara's not going to be able to smell that. So the only two that we can smell are marijuana and the alcohol. And alcohol, people also, coming into EAP for substance abuse assessments, we continued to do those all in person throughout the pandemic, just because we felt like seeing the person was the best way for us to get a good picture of what was going on. And with the odor, sometimes people will put lots of cologne on to cover up. Even if they've showered and everything, again, sometimes people still smell like alcohol. So they'll use a lot of cologne, they may use a lot of mouthwash, things like that to try to cover up the smell. And some people, I think, are just better at smelling alcohol than other people. Like I can smell cigarette smoke a mile away, but if someone's had a drink, I'm not as good at smelling that on them. So flush face too, and a personality change. So flush face can be just the cheeks getting real rosy. Sometimes people's noses get red too. And then the personality change. So some people get real lovey-dovey after a few drinks, and some people get really angry. Some people can get sad. Again, it's just anything that's not typical for them. So our workplace impact. So alcohol can cause folks to be absent from work, and that can be for a number of reasons. They can be hungover and they don't show up for work. They can miss work because they're sick. People with alcoholism have higher risk of even falls at home and injuries at home, along with just the wear and tear that the alcohol causes on your body. Presenteeism. I'm sorry, did somebody have a question?
That's my dog.
Oh, okay. Presenteeism is when, someone's at work, they're physically there, but they're not mentally there. And that just decrease in productivity, of course. If you're just there and you're hungover and you're feeling like garbage, you're not producing at 100%. And the work that you do produce could be flawed. There could be mistakes in it. So in the workplace, we do have an increased risk of accidents by all those things that I was talking about just a few minutes ago, the impaired judgment, and the reaction times, things like that. And then we have an increased risk of injury to coworkers as well, decreased productivity that I mentioned. And then this last bullet point I think is really important, because I think a lot of people don't realize this. They think about the accident piece and they think about the presenteeism, but they don't think about the risk of conflict and inappropriate behavior. And that goes back to folks who have alcohol in their system at work. Again, that judgment's impaired. They might say something that they normally wouldn't say to a coworker. They might do something that they might not typically do without alcohol in them. So, the chances are that someone gets into an argument goes up, as well as doing things that are inappropriate. And, we saw a few slides back that Barbara shared the bullet points about, thinking about striking a coworker and things like that. Those things all increase when we have alcohol in us.
I'm learning. Oh, there we go. Another question.
Class participation time.
So how many more days of work do you think folks with alcohol disorders miss?
We have a B, 25%, 15%, 35, another 25. No one's saying 5. I love it.
Yes. And a C.
So there's a C, another C. Yeah, it is 35%. And for all the reasons that we just mentioned.
Now that exciting reasonable suspicion.
So reasonable suspicion, and this definition is straight from the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensation website. So this is the good faith belief, but it's based on specific objective facts that a supervisor who's been trained has witnessed, and you put 2 and 2 together in your head, and you decide that an employee may have violated your drug and alcohol policy, and you should take that person to get tested. So reasonable suspicion is part of the drug-free safety program, and it's typically part of it. You can have reasonable suspicion without being a member of drug-free safety as well. But this is where you are looking at a person and you recognize in the workplace that something's off. Those things that I mentioned, they are possibly slurring their words. They're just not acting like themselves. They smell like alcohol. Anytime that you have the smell of alcohol, as I mentioned for that, or marijuana, that's pretty much a home run for reasonable suspicion. Any other time, you try to come up with a couple of different things, like they're slurring their words, their coordination is off, their eyes are red and bloodshot. You try to come up with a few different things to have to make your case for reasonable suspicion.
Okay,
so anytime that you think that you have a person that you may need to use a reasonable suspicion clause for, we always tell people to just follow your drug and alcohol policy. Anytime that we get a call, and I'll get a call from someone from one of our companies, I don't know, Diana, I just don't know, and I don't want to make the mistake, and accuse somebody when they haven't been drinking. So we encourage folks to just go straight to their policy, and I'll ask one, do you have reasonable suspicion in your policy? Because, if you don't have it in there, you're running a risk. We tell people to be consistent with everyone. What you do for one employee, you do for all. If you make inconsistent decisions, it just opens you up to a number of issues. If you, let somebody go home, you drive them home, you think they were drinking, and you just send them home for the day. And then the next person that comes along that you think were drinking is me. And you take, you send me through the reasonable suspicion process. I can come back and say, well, protected class, I'm over 50, I'm a female, they're just out to get me. So we always encourage consistency. And thinking about your drug and alcohol policy, how you document, reasonable suspicion is, I think, the easiest to go through the process. And because people don't go through this very often with their employees, and when you don't do something all the time, you can get rusty at it. The easiest thing to do is have a form all ready to go. And it's kind of like a checkbox of things as opposed to writing out a narrative for your documentation. We also encourage people to think about how often their policies are reviewed. A couple of years ago, medical marijuana was legalized in Ohio, and some companies don't have any language in their policy around medical marijuana even. And they just don't think about it, and then there's an issue. So it's always good to flip through your policies every once in a while, review them, and to make sure that your staff know what the elements are as well. So the other things we encourage people to look at their policy for is to make sure that you have a process for if the person tests positive, the waiting time between the time you take the person to get tested to the time the results come back. Are they going to be paid? Are they suspended without pay? All those things will be questions that come up. Same thing as if there's a refusal, the process for that. What if a person just says, I'm not going? What if a person gets to the testing center and then they leave before they submit a urine and breathalyzer? And then what's your policy for time off? If the person ends up coming through the EAP and we make a recommendation for them to go to treatment, maybe inpatient, what's the policy for that?
And so I like that Diane. It's almost as if we put these slides together ourselves, knowing EAP was next. But working with your EAP and partner organizations, my primary role is working with a lot of businesses, HR directors, safety directors. And I hear a lot of times, well, I have an EAP. My first question is who? When truth is, some of you have Tri-Health. I always go, they're an excellent EAP. But sometimes they have an EAP that's connected to their insurance company, and it's 5 free sessions over the phone, or I call the EAP that we personally have at Beckett kind of a middle ground, okay, because they contract with local providers. So I get 10 sessions actually with a local provider, not just on the phone. But I think it's important, no matter what kind of EAP you have. Well, I say that, but I was just going to say, we, like at Beckett, I consider us a partner local resource. We work closely with local EAPs. And a perfect example of following procedures, I thought about this when Diane was talking, is when you were saying somebody may show up but then not stay for the test, is we have a number of companies we work with as a local partner. And part of the role is somebody tests positive, they get assessed by their EAP or their counselor, they come to us for treatment, and then they do not want treatment, they tell us that, and then they leave for some other benign reason. So oddly enough, thinking that the person who sent them to us won't call us to check up, but and they signed a release, but following that process. And so if you're working with an EAP that's not in town or offsite, you may want to make sure you have a local partner. And there are lots. There's the Alcoholism Council. It's not called that anymore. The Addiction Council. Yeah. There's Beckett, there's Lindner, there's Sun. There are lots of partner and local resources. And I say that too, because not every organization fits together. So make sure you have a partner, somebody you can kind of count on. Hey, what do I do with this? I mean, I have people call me all the time, and it has nothing to do with Beckett. They're just calling me like, have you heard of this before? Have you heard of that before? And Diane and I all reach out to each other. Have you had any instances with this, or where do you go? But basically look at what your processes are and ask yourself, is it working? When I have someone who needs help, do I know what to do? And is that working? And stress to your people, going to the EAP is not always a punishment. People go to EAP for lots of reasons, but it is not uncommon to be used for substance use. So now another fun quiz. So percentage of people with substance use disorders that receive treatment each year. I'll give you all a hint on this one. It's not the largest number. Since everything else was the largest number. B. Mm-hmm.
Yes, a couple of B's.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I would be thrilled if 30% of folks with substance use disorders receive treatment every year, but it is only 10%. The old adage is the first step is admitting there's a problem. It's very true here too. There are lots of us walking around. In fact, the CDC also reports that approximately 8% of us in the world or in the US are living with a substance use disorder. Now, this includes folks in recovery because they still have a substance use disorder, but they're living in recovery, folks that are not admitting they have a problem, and folks that are currently struggling, like they know this is an issue, it is affecting my life, but that's 8%. There's also 8% of us living with diabetes. So it's not an uncommon issue, but only 10% of us will go get help. So that leads us to what treatment is. And I like to go through these slides because, well, until I worked at Beckett, I didn't really understand what treatment was. I had my own ideas from what I saw on TV or just what I'd been exposed to. So what treatment is, as you can see here, most treatment programs assign you to a treatment of team professionals. So depending on, so if we're talking about alcohol, we may go through detox, but we have a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, a therapist, maybe a substance use professional, maybe a peer advocate, all kinds of things. So this is depending on the type of treatment they're going through. But the very first step that somebody goes through is to get an evaluation of them, their substance use, and to figure out what the appropriate level of care is. We'll go through the various levels of care, but in that evaluation, what the assessor is looking for is how much is somebody using, and how much and how often, how long have they been doing this, when's the last time they drank, are they able to stay sober at all, have they ever tried to do this? And so we look at those because we want to understand a pattern. And this is also, everything's also relative here. I had a call the other day from somebody, and because of their religion, they don't drink. And in the pandemic, it started, she had a little bit of wine. And within 6 months, she was having 2 glasses of wine a day. She was struggling with this. A lot of us are like 2 glasses, but for her and in her world, this is a big deal. And she felt out of control with it. So it's also kind of, that person would not need inpatient, they need outpatient, but you have to look at the relative situation. And somebody who's been drinking for 15 years is drinking 2 cases of beer. Another person, it can't hold that much alcohol in a day. So, and then we look at their risk-taking behaviors. What else are they doing that the alcohol or drug use may be affecting? And a lot of times we see folks that they have a co-occurring mental health issue, whether it's anxiety or depression, and they're escaping to the substance to get past that. But then it will also sometimes trigger other risk-taking behaviors. A lot of gambling, especially in the pandemic, we saw a higher level of online gambling. And we saw also a higher level of online porn sites and calling
1-800 numbers, basically.
All kinds of stuff happening, but just increased in risk-taking behaviors. And like Diane had said, our judgment is impaired when we're drinking. So deciding I am going to drive to the store to get the milk, even though I've had, a bottle and a half of wine. That's a bad decision. But that's what people do. And then we want to know what a person has at their disposal as far as resources and psychosocial. So it's a full evaluation, figure out what level of care. So I always like to stress to people, just because somebody has a substance use doesn't mean they go away for 28 days. So the different levels of care, you do have an inpatient detox, which is a short, acute, usually about a week. And basically it's a medical situation. The only drugs that have a inpatient detox protocol are alcohol, opiates, and benzodiazepines, which are the Xanax, Valiums, Ativans of the world. The others do not have an inpatient detox because you can't die from them. You actually can't die from the opiate detox either. It's just really, really hard. And after detox, somebody may go to a residential program. Many of you have probably heard of a 28-day program because that's a magic number. But a residential program where somebody goes away. And so that's a lower level of care. There's still usually some medical staff there, but their days consist of treatment, group therapy and things like that, which can be very similar then to partial hospitalization, which I had never heard of that until I came to work at Beckett Springs. But basically what that is somebody may be at a hospital for 5-6 hours a day, 5-6 days a week, depending on their program. And it's every day. So they're going there. And then from there, intensive outpatient, which is, and that's all group therapy also. They have an individual therapist, but most of the work is done in groups. And then from that intensive outpatient, so very similar, except 3 hours a day, 3 days a week is very common. And then outpatient is your one-on-one therapist, counselor, psychologist. And that's where you again get to what is my long-term recovery plan? How often do I do this? And then from there, you might, in a substance use situation, drop down to, your AA, NA, Smart Recovery, whatever group works for you.
Barbara, I'm going to jump in for a second. One of the things that I think we see a lot with HR and safety directors, and why I think that slide that Barbara showed just a couple ago on how we get this one here, how we get to the point of like what's recommended, what the treatment recommendations are. Because a lot of times I'll get calls from someone I get an HR person or safety, and they're like, "Hey, Diane, I don't understand this. You know, we just been doing this for a little while, but we had 2 people who tested positive for marijuana, and one of them just went to outpatient, and the other one that he messes up all the time. Well, he ended up, doing blah blah, inpatient, and they don't really understand why it's different treatment recommendations for the same type of drug. So these are all the things, all those bullet points is what goes into coming up with that decision on the level of care. All those things make an impact. And, those other factors, the psychosocial problems and lack of resources, having supportive family and friends is a huge indicator of success in recovery as well. So that lack of resources is always a red flag for us when they don't have any support system to count on. And what made the pandemic so bad was, again, that, our supports were messed up. We couldn't see people the way that we usually do, and touch people the way that we usually do. So we saw a lot of people spike with that factor. Not having that support system in place or not feeling like they could access it as they normally would. So, but when HR and safety folks call and they have that question, it's we have to respond with kind of general with things like this, like we take into account frequency and the amount the person's been using, and then sometimes folks tell us or tell Barbara's teams, they've been using a whole bunch of other substances. They got caught for marijuana because, that THC hangs out in our bodies for so long that, but when they were tested, the cocaine was out of their system, or the alcohol was out of their system at the time. So we really, we kind of have to talk in generalities because we can't disclose confidential information, but all those things go into that. So sometimes it's hard from that, from the business operations side to understand all of that, especially if you need that person back at work, back on the line, and they're off work for a while. So go ahead, Barbara. Sorry, I just wanted to jump that in.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up because it comes up with me too. People will call me and they'll just say, this person needs to come in for their marijuana treatment. And I'm like, so what is that? And I was like, I don't know. And so I talk to them and find out. And to your point, it's not always just marijuana. And talking about how long, because that's the other question too, is people will just tell me, I got 2 weeks to get better. And first off, nobody's a wizard. Nobody can do that. You can miss 2 weeks of work and then, but continuing with type of treatment, then it's finding what treatment will work. But treatment is going to affect, like I put here, every part of a person's life. So it's that going to Beckett and starting detox and then going off to a residential and you're off work for, let's say, a month. That's step one. Because now you have to figure out, how do you live without doing something you've been doing every day for X number of years? And that's going to also be everywhere. Everyone goes out after work or, at the parties and things like that. Someday we'll have parties again. And so treatment is forever. And people may relapse, as folks say, and need to get back into treatment, stay on their level of treatment. And typically we also find that relapse isn't just, I was at a party and I saw a beer and I had to have one. There's more, stuff happens for that person because they don't want to relapse. So stuff's happening, a big fight, a layoff at work, all kinds of things can happen. It kind of triggers, and that's the automatic go-to. And that's the big struggle for folks. I had a great question, which that's where we are. I had a great question as far as I didn't talk about way back on the slide about HR, EAPs, and partner organizations, how you figure that out. Depending on the size of your organization and how many folks you have, usually has a factor into how big your EAP may or may not be. I always say, and I'm not just saying this because Diane's here, but I always say, A local EAP like Tri-Health, and I'll say St. Elizabeth has one too, so, you know, so play both sides. But a local EAP I find is a good place to start, because you can really sit down with somebody and they have super, super robust programs and they have much more lightweight programs. So you can kind of talk to somebody and figure out what the budget is, what you need, what you're looking to achieve with an EAP. If your budget doesn't allow, it doesn't make sense, and you have, like what we have at Beckett, a hybrid, I always suggest working with partner organizations, and that's when you call someone like me, or, you know, Bethesda, drug and alcohol, all kinds of places, and talk to them and see what is your process. Because like I say, I like to work as a partner in that people can just call me and say, I don't know if this is an issue or not, or what do you think? And I'm not an expert. I don't know anything, but I have a couple of companies that just use our evaluations because they're free and 24/7. And they're like, the guy tested positive for marijuana. I don't know if it's a big issue or a little issue. And, you know, their EAP is connected to their insurance and it's a 1-800 number that's not helpful. So how to get started, it's really reach out to folks you know, ask other companies, who do you use? Who do you like them? Does it work? You know, and know that if you use a local company, there's they usually have a lot of different levels of care that you can purchase. But here we are, questions. Any other questions? You can unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Over there.
While we wait to see if maybe somebody comes up with a question, I'll just say really quickly, you know, as more things open up with the pandemic not ending, but more people being vaccinated and things opening up, you know, I know California is going to go full open in mid-June, and we've got other states doing that. You know, the research tells us that we really haven't seen the height of the mental health and substance use issues yet, that this ripple effect is going to continue, and we'll see more folks struggling with issues around the long-term touch deprivation, and more as people go back to work and get out more and start seeing people, that we're going to realize that there's more mental health issues and more substance issues and more alcohol issues. So we're really, not to end the presentation on a down note here, but we really want to just make people aware of that so that we have our eyes open and looking for things so that folks are safe in the workplace, they're safe at home, and as things open back up, that we keep an eye out for those issues.
And then I have up there, hopefully you all won't actually see my screen, but I have up there mine and Diane's contact information. So even if there was a question that you think of later and you think, I should have asked that Diane about this, you can always reach out to us with questions, or you just don't want everyone to know you have a question. You can also reach out to us, and that's not a problem either. We're here, you know, this is what we do and this is what we love to do. And for me personally, when I started at Beckett, now that we have actually had kind of a robust education program, it's very exciting to me because that's what I really like to do. So I'm going to stop sharing. Everybody has this stuff on. I mean, like I say, it's only been a year that I've been using Zoom. So there we go. I've gotten really good at it.
Hey, it's only been a year, right?
It's only been a year.
Well, Diane and Barbara, I want to thank you so much on behalf of ACI and all of our members. I want to thank you both for being here today and helping talk about this very important and also tough topic that is definitely affecting our members and our community. So thank you guys again.